Do you think like the guys who are really into like
Identifying as
yeah,
that.
like being the daddy or like role play, like they would be social possibly,
Well, or
or at
social
least have
second
it,
as well.
yeah, in there.
I think so. I
Interesting.
mean, and it's possible. I mean, I could see social last doing it to some degree. Someone
Mm.
that had a different history than I do, but yeah, generally speaking, I think there's a much more solid base to work from if you're social first or second.
Because that
Well,
term doesn't
yeah,
do anything for me. I've
No.
realized it doesn't light anything up
you
for
guys are
me.
boring.
It's
Yeah, I
just
didn't think it would, but it does.
Writing that down.
well, I think
uh,
self-pres has more hooks for that. I feel.
could be, could
What do you
be. Yeah,
mean?
Because the provider thing, like
it's that.
Okay.
Partly
David's
that.
definitely got some of that going. Whereas the only thing I'm providing, I'm
Is
providing
that dick?
is that dick. So
And nothing else.
nothing else.
I won't pay for your cab.
Yep.
Have no money.
I wonder why women think it's a one night stand.
Yeah. I'm not paying for shit.
Oh my god.
I got jokes and dick. That's it.
The big hormone enneagram.
Let me lay it on the line. I got a little freakiness inside. Let you know that the man has got to deal with it.
Hi, it's John here. I'm a sexual self-pres for the 458 tri-type.
Hi, David here. I'm a self-pres sexual 9 with a 1, 974 tri-type.
Hey, it's Emeka. I'm an 8 wing 7 sexual type with the 854 tri.
Hey, it's Nancy. I'm a self-pres social 3, wing 4, and 369 tri-type.
The year is unknown. Civilization has collapsed. We are left in a desert. And what do you experience in a desert? Thirst. We are thirsty. Big hormone enneagram Fury Road. My name is John. My world is fire and blood. Once I was an Enneagram 4, a road warrior searching for righteous cause. I am joined by Imperator Furiosa Nancy,
Hi.
Imotin Emeka, and War Boy David.
Yes.
I was itching to do a thirsty Fury Road introduction, given our topic.
That was amazing.
Very nice.
Yes.
Is this just like, is this the oasis of people fucking in the middle of
Yes,
the
the
desert?
citadel of thirst traps and something to quench our desires.
Yeah, we're gonna
Okay.
be known for the
Sandy.
podcast that talks about the Enneagram podcast that talks about sex liberally.
that actually acts like human beings are human beings.
Oh,
Yeah.
God, I don't know if I'm ready for everyone to hear this.
Oh, it's happening.
We are a very moist podcast.
Yes, this is a very moist podcast.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting how many like massive differences, like polar opposite differences, are between the sexual first and sexual blind.
Those
And-
conversations we had in the chat were really good.
Yeah. Well, it's funny to me because I think when I was newer, I thought I was doing sexual a lot.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but it's actually just the self-pred showing up in a weird way. Because I feel like sexual is like kind of portrayed in this, like, I don't know, in this very friendly, it's kind of like the 4 of instincts, right?
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah.
for
People
sure.
just portrayed in this like friendly way. So everybody's like, oh yeah, I'm sexual first. And it's like, no, you're not.
No.
But we don't know that because we're doing it.
But you know, the thing is, a lot of work still has to be done in making it clear what the hell sexual is. I mean, as with all the instincts,
Mhm.
but especially that one because it's the one that's the hardest to describe in a very concrete way. Because at least with social, you can sort of show like, okay, here are these things that these social institutions and things that we've created based on social and self-pres, whereas with sexual, you can't necessarily point to a sexual display because once you point to something, it can be replicated. So,
Yeah.
like a style of dress, or I don't know, like something that was captivating for one person at a certain time can become a style for a whole new generation of people. That's not the sexual drive anymore. If you can buy it at Forever 21, it's not.
It's not
It's
the
not the
sexual
sexual
drive. It's
drive.
complete opposite of it. Yeah, and I think the biggest issue when it comes to the Enneagram in general is that the words we use don't mean the same thing to someone else.
That's true.
So when you
Major.
said like
That's major.
reinventing yourself, it's like, yeah, I do that all the time, but I'm
Yeah.
not sexual first.
Yeah. Well, I guess I have to get more specific on what that means. Self reinvention, self mutation. I
Words are a
guess.
problem.
Yeah.
Words
Well,
are
I guess the way I see that happening is it's happening in the moment. Like it almost makes the sexual drive or sexual type seem like they're sevenish, which isn't true. But like the way someone is willing
right.
to follow where the chemistry is going, like the willingness to sort of subvert yourself, and um, it's something that I'm trying to find the words to describe that sexual types are
It
doing.
it flirts around danger. It risks self-destruction.
Hmm.
I don't know if that sounds too grandiose or anything.
That's good.
No.
Dramatic.
That's a
Well,
good one.
I think the answer is to have sexual blind people fuck sexual first people, and they would know exactly what it is.
No,
I
I don't even
volunteer
think
as tribute.
I don't think you would even tell within the act
No.
itself. Like, I don't know if there would be. I would say probably the one thing that's because when everyone's trying to fuck, everyone turns it on. You know that
Yeah.
energy of
Yeah.
I want to get under this person's skin. Like that's when even sexual blinds, like it feels like when they're into me, it feels like oh shit, like this. It feels like something a person who had sexual would do. But then it's like outside of this context, they're uncomfortable with that energy. Whereas I'm like, yeah, let's continue this. Like we have this thing, but it was like, no, they just wanted to fuck me. But
Mhm.
now I'm just like, no, let's like go to breakfast and let's like meet up next week and do it again. And like,
Hell no. That is a short instance of time. But it's funny that it's so I never knew that that's what sexual was until you guys started talking about it, because like that I can do that with like men I don't care about,
hmm yeah,
which is what we were talking about on
Such
the
as
chat.
these guys who you're trying to convince them right now to have sex with you because they're sexual first.
yeah.
No, with
Oh,
you,
okay.
David.
Oh,
Um,
She cares about us.
no, it's not so much that men I don't care about. It's like men I'm not intimidated by. Like I can never see a future with them.
Okay,
So
so that's
like
what's
it's not so
going
much.
on.
Yeah, so it's not so much that I don't care about people. It's that I'm like, yeah, I'd never bring you home to my parents. That kind of thing. But it's like, I can turn it on, but the second they do it in public in front of other people that I didn't like, I didn't turn it on,
Oh,
like they turned it on, I didn't. I'm like, oh, whoa.
yeah. Shut that down.
okay. I've been trying like for years. I've probably bored all of you with this sort of questioning that I've had to understand what the fuck has been going on with me and my sex life. Like what happens with I show up at a bar and some girl is like all over me for whatever reason, or because she's into me, and I'm interpreting that as genuine interest, but it's really
Mm-mm.
aggressive. It's really aggressive, and I interpret that as like, okay, she really likes me, but the fact is she's being really aggressive because she doesn't give a fuck about me.
Well, it's not that again, it's not that I wouldn't give a fuck about
Well, I mean, like that's it,
you.
it wouldn't show up in any other context. Like besides sexuality, besides like I want to have sex with him, um, like they I'm like, oh, she really likes me and like let's hang out some other time. But it's like, no, like I don't want you to meet like I'm compartmentalized for just
Yes.
Yes. There you
Yeah.
go.
sexuality.
You are the guy at the bar.
Exactly.
And you stay nameless.
Compartmentalized is a good.
Yeah, that's a really
that kind of gives you the structuralness of self-pres and social, right?
Mhm.
Oh,
That
that's
kind of
true.
alludes to that. Yeah. There's
So
your.
That's really
Yeah.
true.
I did understand I like you were saying in the chat the other time that sexualized girls or people in general are assuming that if we have sex that you don't want to do this again, or if you were to do it again, it's not going to be in any other context. It's not an invitation for us to merge in any other way. And I interpret sexual interest as interest.
No. So I
Global,
think so.
global interest.
Well, what's
Wait.
what? hmm?
Sexual interest doesn't translate to interest.
Interest? No.
Yeah,
No,
apparently
it doesn't.
it does not.
So
New
here's
revelation.
where I
I
get
was
a
trying to
little-
figure that one out.
Oh my God. This is okay. This is so
That's
funny to me.
that's how I know there is interest.
Exactly.
Oh. Oh.
So I've been suffering
I'm
for
so glad you're
years.
married.
Suffering.
For years because I just like I don't understand. It's like,
I
why
mean,
do you?
Even
No.
if Laurie doesn't want to have sex, I think she doesn't love me.
Aw. Oh, I have the urge to hug you right now, John.
or the
Fortunately,
opposite,
she's always down.
or
Hell
the
yeah.
opposite. Someone who does want to have sex with you a lot is really into having sex with you, but isn't actually interested in you. That doesn't
So-
make any
That's
sense
a
to me.
weird one. Yeah.
So, first of all, in the context of a relationship, I'm always down to have sex with my boyfriend.
Mhm.
So that kind of, in a relationship it changes a little bit. But I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, it's weird to me because I don't know how much of this is like a self-pres social thing and how much of this is like uh from the media, because men are portrayed as once portrayed, this is not accurate, but they're portrayed as once we fuck, you will no longer be able to date them. Like if you have sex on the first date, they aren't going to like you, and like
Mm.
you done messed up. So I don't know how much of this is like an assumption in a girl's mind and how much of this is their actual instinct. Like there is a line there because there's a lot of girls that are like, "Oh, I don't want to have sex on the first date because he's not going to like you after that." But then, so if we have sex on the first date, we assume you are.
Okay. I mean, I guess that's kind of showing social blindness because no matter how many times I hear that, it doesn't stick. The
Yeah.
idea of people putting a social judgment on how quickly they have sex, um, that has never computed for me. But apparently, it's a big deal.
It is a big deal. It has stopped being a big deal to me, but that's like due to a massive amount of work.
Mhm.
So I don't really know where that line is of like where is the instinct and where is this just ingrained in our minds due to media.
So you're saying that gives the woman
Well-
freedom, so to speak, like knowing that that's going to ruin the whole long term as a woman, then you might as well just go for it and do the one night thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, if you want to, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. But also like I am better at that than a lot of my female friends. So like that, that doesn't.
Yeah.
It's not
You're
for
the
everyone.
machine.
Yeah, pretty much. The praying mantis.
Mhm.
I've come to understand that if someone that I just met is sexually aggressive with me, it's because they've already decided that I'm a guy who will not give a fuck and will not demand any sort of emotional connection. Like-
Probably.
Yeah, I mean, maybe my hair gives it away. I don't know.
No, I don't think it's your hair.
She sees me and she's like, "Yep, that guy. He's down. He's definitely down to fuck." And I'm not.
I mean,
know.
you look like a good time though.
Yeah, I guess.
Like, you know what I mean? Like you're that like stereotypical attractive guy. So I mean, not stereotypical, but you're an attractive guy. So it's like,
It's
girls
those
are like,
shirts.
it's the shirts, man.
It's the
And the
shirts.
fact that by the end of the evening at a bar, they're usually unbuttoned.
Down to the belly button.
There's no buttons left, all right? I don't know what you're talking about. There's
It's
no
like, yeah, why am I being pursued for sex? But then I look like a thought, like a hoe.
and you're the first one to come up behind a girl and like like put your ass near her ass.
I do that.
Yes, you
I do a lot of
do.
slutty things. So there you go.
Yes.
The mating dance.
Surprise, surprise. I'm
There has
just
to
trying to
be.
understand why, it has to be just one night, like why does it have to be compartmentalized? And I think that's the difference is I think sexual interest is interest, but apparently sexual interest can just be just sex and
Yeah.
that's it.
And it's the problem of definitions coming up around things.
Hmm.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah, I mean, I'm sexual blind, and I have really never had an issue with separating sex from liking someone. Like, not ever. Like, I was always the person that like made boys cry.
Wow.
I have had a
Wow.
man fall in front of me after sex because I got a Tinder update on my phone and I looked
Nancy.
at it. And he was
Cold
like, "What are
blood.
you doing?" And I was like,
What?
I'm looking at Tinder. What are you doing?" And he was like, "Why would you do that?" And I'm like,
Oh God.
"No."
That guy is me.
Oh, no. Well, I can tell you right now, you are way cooler than him. So
No, I would just be
kind of a
crying
dweeb.
silently inside. I wouldn't let you know.
Oh no, that's worse.
There would only be the slightest lip quiver to betray.
But see, that taught me. I was like, "Oh, this isn't how everyone functions." I wouldn't have known that if he didn't cry in front of me. I was like, "Oh, wow, this is like a thing."
Yeah, and it
I
was
had no
interesting to see
idea.
in the chat that not every sexual blind agreed with the way you feel about this. So, not to say that every sexual blind
Oh
is
no,
it
yeah.
can easily compartmentalize that thing, but I'm starting to see that there is something to that for
Hmm.
every sexual blind. So I'm trying to understand it, even though maybe not every sexual blind is as cold.
Well, yeah, this is like the three who has like shoved their heart into the deepest, darkest corners of their being. So, maybe don't take me as an example.
Hmm.
Yeah.
But no, that's a very interesting. It's a very interesting line of discussion as to like to get at what the sexual type is, how sexual types interpret interest, and um, yeah, what that's
Yeah.
about.
I always thought sexual types were a lot harsher, but you guys are making it sound like you're just giant blobs of goo that just want to be held.
Hmm.
Like, I
well,
always thought of sexual types as being like the type that was like the most like fuck off, but like you're not somehow, but you still are. I don't know.
well, it's a problem of attraction, right? So, oops, you're attracted, and so you're in. You know what I mean? And so then there's a thing you got to do, and you got to play it out, or find, whether it can go somewhere. And so you get sort of pulled in, right, against your own will, almost, right?
Hmm. Yeah, it's incredibly vulnerable because you're giving up a part of yourself to um like you're just taken in a way, and uh it, it's hard to be tough when your boundaries are that permeable against your own will.
There's a symbolic or metaphorical idea of the genitalia is the sensitive area, right? So your sense, and so it's also representative of psychological sensitivity,
Hmm.
right?
So, David, at one point you told me that um like the sexual instinct, I forgot how you put it. Well, I don't think I could ever remember how you put anything.
Yeah.
But um you said that the sexual instincts kind of like the female, because I was explaining a sexual eight to you and I was surprised by how soft they were, and you said that the sexual instinct can actually soften an eight. And I thought that was interesting, and at one point you described it as like a
Oh,
female or something.
yeah. I mean, just again, I'm always doing whatever archetypal psychological rather than the actual animal necessarily instinct. But yeah, I mean, I think of it as androgynous, right? So, whereas eight is sort of just using eight as an example to put with the sexual instinct, eight is prototypical, sort of the masculine sort of prototype, right? So to speak, the macho prototype. And then sexuals bringing in a full, you know, 50%, you know, module into that space. And that's if eight is about armoring up and sexual is partly water and fire is a pretty big problem in relation to having some armor on, right? you know, it's uh it doesn't really work. You have to take the armor off, right?
Hmm.
And yeah, I mean, or else you're not going to mix fires. You're not going to be able to mix waters, and the armor is going to get wet, and it's going to chafe you, and or it's going to be burning, and you're going to have to strip the whole thing off. I don't know if that's going too far afield into abstraction, but that's how I work with it.
No,
Partly,
you strip it off, David. Go ahead.
yeah. So yeah. So
Well,
anyway, it's a significant. Yeah, I mean, sexual gets conceptualized as pretty as phallic is one simple way to say it. But one of our points would be that it's both phallic and ionic, vaginal, whatever the word.
okay, you're meaning like female, male.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's hermaphroditic is one word I use,
Okay. That makes
figuratively,
sense. Yeah.
androgynous, and it's why androgyny comes up in a fair number of you know human artists, that are as opposed to animal artists,
Or
artists that are
aliens.
yeah, uh,
As opposed to
uh,
alien artists.
that's
Right. Yeah.
right,
You
that's
don't
right.
never know what they're gonna do.
Yeah,
But anyway, go ahead.
or fish artists.
Yeah.
Uh,
Parasitic.
yeah. Um, why androgyny comes up as a theme and why it's actually like an ideal, right?
Like
It's like
for sexual types or
for
for
sexual types. For
okay.
people with sexual first and second, androgyny is like a high
Mm.
ideal. You know what I mean? It's like a uh yeah.
One of the common getting it wrong things that I see all over the internet when people typing sexual types is just, or people they think are sexual types is like often you see these very one dimensional masculine characters or people that are,
Yeah.
oh, this is a sexual type because they're extreme in some form, or they have a very masculine presenting posture. But like I think just off the top of my head, I mean, nearly every sexual type male at least has something very androgynous about
Yeah.
not just their appearance but the way they display their energy.
Yeah.
And it's because of this, that you're not keeping a solid boundary. You're looking for that boundary to be revised on some level. And yeah, the reason is David speaking to the water and fire in the sexual is because of this, you know, phallic ionic polarity that and sex is about polarity itself. And we get this trinity of instincts, but we also get this quaternity, if that's the right word, of energies.
So that that kind of makes sense why like social and self-pres first or excuse me, sexual blind people have such a hard time with sexual first and second people because self-pres social is like all about the boundaries
Oh yeah.
and
And all about the
structure.
and again all about the definitions, whereas
Hmm.
sexual is just this thing is water and fire which could flow and go anywhere and
Hmm.
become anything, and it's destroying as it goes. I mean, if you want to keep the metaphor going, right? It's
Yeah.
actually destroying structures, and its sexual instinct has an openness to letting that happen, and that's part of the boundary drop.
Have you, Nancy? Have you, besides myself, do you know any? Have you met any other sexual eights? And
Um, so there was a sexual 8. I mean, I think she typed herself correctly, in the narrative training, and
okay,
she was female, which was very different. Um, yeah, so I think that's really the only other one. There aren't really
because it's
many
a
types out in the world.
yeah. It's I was gonna bring that back up because eights are good type to look at the sexual drive because of how strong they're supposed to be and what the sexual drive does to them. And so those of us who I think for me it took meeting some other sexual aids to really like okay understand an aspect of myself, to see another sexual aid like okay how does that feel, a type that is forceful but then you've got this energy that's really soft. And the first time I met a sexual eight was a couple years ago at IEA. um, and she someone told me, I think it was David, I mean you might have told me that hey so and so is a sexual eight, you should go talk to her. So I we ended up meeting, and it was the first time that I met someone who she had this like it was penetrating but soft but energy, but when you got really close it was like a steel beam.
Mhm.
that was that was what it felt like, and I was like oh I guess because from a distance it feels like oh this is kind of like a inviting
Yeah, it feels almost
presence.
social.
Yeah, it feels soft from a distance, but then when you get close, it's like you run into a brick wall. Like there's it's there, like the solidity is there, but it's only up close.
Yeah.
And um and she just came off really playful, and we talked about sexual drive because we just talked about sexual eightness. And I guess that's been my experience with other sexual types. And with eight, it's just kind of weird because sexual eights just feel really flexible. Like it feels like this person can go anywhere. Whereas most eights, like self-pres eights, or have very strong boundaries, and social eights kind of have a thing that they're trying to maintain in terms of
Yeah.
a position. And with sexual eights, it's kind of like just wild, squiggly energy. Like I don't know where this is gonna go. Let's just go with it. That kind of a thing. That's
Right.
wild.
Which is really stressful for me. I hate the going anywhere thing. I have to be on Valium to do that. I can't. Um, what I'm curious because like I never know who is a sexual instinct and who's not. Like it always just confuses the crap out of me. Um, what about like a softer type, like a generally like welcoming softer type? What would like a sexual instinct look like on them?
Hmm.
Do you have
Like
a
which type?
specific type?
I mean, I guess the soft type that comes to mind as a 2, even though I know they're not, like, soft, but,
Mm,
like, you know what I'm like that I don't know.
Sexual twos can be pretty intense. Like there's sort of like so it's interesting because twos are generally very warm, but I think the sexual instinct makes a sexual two a little you feel they're hungry. And I don't know any sexual two men in my life, but I've met several sexual two women. And like I know one, for example, who is like a sex therapist or coach or something like that. Um, but they've got like when they're into you, they're extremely assertive in pursuing you. It's sort of the same thing where if I'm a self-pres too and I feel like you're sick, I'll really hands-on take care of you a little bit too much. Or a social too, it's like I get really involved in your personal stuff. But for sexual too, like they're the type that when they're not so healthy, would in a snowstorm like intentionally lock themselves out of their apartment and then be like, "Oh, I've locked myself out, and you're the only place I can go."
Mhm.
There's
Like,
a
they
lot of
will
like,
get you.
yeah, there's a lot of I will get you, making it happen. And a lot of their seduction style is making you feel like you're so desirable that they can't control themselves. They know that seduction or feeling attractive is very attractive.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Oh,
And so even if like what happens with when in anybody using the sexual instinct, whether it's in your stacking or not or whatever, healthy or unhealthy, not healthy, whatever. If you're using the sexual instinct and it's healthy, um, the sexual instinct is attracting you to enlivening and creative influences in people and experiences, right? Like it's an instinct about what's going to challenge, revise, or transform my boundaries and sort of upend any kind of stagnancy in my psyche, whatever.
mhm,
Um, but when it's unhealthy, I become attracted to things that basically recapitulate old identity structures in the guise of something new and enlivening and creative. So it looks creative and new, but it's that kind of thing where somebody will fall in love madly with uh, four different people in a row, and every time they think it's some new, great, amazing thing, but turns out the same old abusive patterns show up in every single relationship that are almost identical, right?
Hmm.
Um, so the sexual instinct is like keeping a status quo under the guise of not keeping a status quo. And so one of the things I can play into for the two is I can uh, fall in love, so to speak, or infatuation with somebody who I'm really not attracted to. But because the super ego is very strong in the two and the sense of love is very strong, I can override my body's actual in the moment experience of attraction, and I can pursue really hard because they're pinging some other part of my mental emotional stuff. And so something I've seen is often like sexual to women with a guy who's like clearly below their league. You know what I mean? Like in terms
Hmm.
of
Yeah.
both being attractive but also being interesting, like kind of a dud and or abusive or just a piece of shit. And um maybe one of their parents made them feel like a piece of shit in the same way this guy does. So they pursue the crap out of him. Um, and then also with sexual too, you get a lot of it's sort of like sexual nine, but much more overt, where you get a lot of I'm adapting my preferences to conform to your taste. Like if you like this, then I really like it, and it's there's a lot of I don't know who I am because like the two who can be so preoccupied with helping or being in a relationship, uh, sexual two can lose their sense of who and what their authentic preferences and identity are because I'm trying so hard to make this connection happen or this attraction happen, and I can get so carried away by making it happen that I lose the connection and authentic anchor to actual attraction, actually what I need and who I am apart from pursuing somebody else. Make sense?
Hmm.
yeah. That fits with uh, a friend of mine since high school who actually passed away about 10 years ago. He OD'd. Um, but he's bisexual, sexual self-pres 2 of the 3. I think his tri-type was 278. So
Damn.
he's pretty assertive
Wow.
too. And I was one of his targets um, for years. And you know, being sort of a passive 9, I wasn't interested in the sex, but the attention was uh was I don't know, somehow interesting to me, and I was uh
Somehow.
yeah,
Strange.
and
David like an attention.
yeah, because I mean he was like really pursuing, and there were other friends in my friend group that he was really pursuing too. I mean he's a really assertive pursuer. I mean like, and trying to convince you, and it was a real, you know he was not kidding around. You were in the sights, you know what I mean? Like this is and one thing I was going to say about that, by the way, is it's interesting. We talked about sexual, and 8 is sexual is a somewhat of a feminizing uh characteristic relative to 8, and I think it's somewhat of a masculine, influence relative to 2, because 8 is like a father archetype, you might say, quintessential and protector, da 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 da, right? And 2 is quintessential mother nurturer. And with sexual, I think it kind of cranks up in a way a masculine aspect that's in 2. And so yeah, he was super pursuant, and o- offering me things, and even trying to convince me, that oh, so and so, Greg or so and so over there, they're not as straight as you think, right? Just shit like that. And like, oh, like I'm supposed to go, oh, okay, wow, they did it. So, oh, okay, here we go. Yeah. And anyway, and trying to convince me with drugs, he always had the good drugs. That was one thing. And that was part of his whole seduction thing, and the whatever he was doing, in
I'm
this,
taking notes over here.
yeah, this process.
Yeah,
Um,
Emeka's got a
That's
line or
creepy.
two, but so do I.
but one of the things I'm getting to here is what's interesting is that because he's a 2, because he was a 2 and super ego type, right? He he would he would say stuff, occasionally throw it in, uh, that this like this thing that we were going to possibly do, like get really drunk or get really high on the best marijuana. We used to call it god weed at the time, the super good stuff back
Oh
then.
my god.
um or acid or whatever it was. There was always a drug thing with him. And then and then the sex, it would be this cathartic thing, it would be this healing, positive thing that we would get to,
Hmm.
not ever named or not ever fully conceptualized, but that was a way for him to frame it as if this whole elaborate, you know process that he was engaging was ultimately for my own good, or any of
Yeah,
his targets' own good, right? Which is interesting. That whole thing, to need to frame it that way when it was so self-involved, and yeah. Anyway, just
that's totally. I feel like pride is one of the least well-defined passions of the Enneagram types. Generally,
mhm,
I think people get it the least, but it's that sense where I can't really own my motivations, like, because I have to see them as good,
mhm.
and so you know it becomes this thing of like I need to be good, and so I reject basically seeing my quote unquote selfish or negative or self involved desires and drives, and I have to spiritualize them and make them good. I don't know I'm doing it, but it turns into this bizarre thing where they're doing all this fucked up shit, but for your good, for your own good. And
Yes,
it's basically saying I don't have human complicated whatevers, feelings,
mixed
desires, needs.
emotions.
And yeah, that's why it leads so quickly in a pathological to entitlement. And so it sounds like your friend had this almost entitlement to a sexual relationship with you because of whatever.
Yeah, and sometimes, and I think that was maybe a piece of the drug aspect, is I've just given you this incredible marijuana that's really expensive, and you owe me something as part of it, and I've paid a certain amount. I've courted you and paid attention to you in this really special way, so now something is owed back or something.
Well,
Wow,
that's
that's
that. Yeah. Well, that sounds kind of fucked up. But um, why are you laughing at that?
No, it's not
um,
fucked up at all.
I'm laughing like I'm adding this to the playbook.
oh my god. Anyway, what I was going to say, before Emika's evil laugh in the background. Um, that I kind of lost my train of thought, but that's kind of a 2 thing. I feel like that's like them way down the levels, but of I don't know what I was gonna say. I have no idea.
I totally destabilized you with my
Yeah, you
laugh.
did.
The
Your
evil
laugh
laugh.
was weird.
Sexual aid up in this bitch.
Let me ask you something though, Nancy. Is part of where you're coming from just then with that is that what I was saying was like something concerning to you almost that happened?
So
Because to me, that's just actually like an interesting story, and there's
oh,
like no, I
malice.
don't, I don't. I, even me calling myself, victim, target, and all that stuff. To me, that's just entertaining. You know what I mean? I don't really
Yeah,
have.
I
It's
know
not like
exactly what you mean.
some. Yeah, it's not.
You sound like Brian right now. I know exactly what you mean. He's like, no, that didn't happen to me. It was just something that happened.
Well, but the fact is, no, no, no. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know that it's quite what you're saying, and I you know, I still said no, and I
Yeah.
wasn't raped. I wasn't, you know what I mean? There's
No, no, no.
no, and
Yeah.
I can push somebody away. You know what I mean? There's which I actually
Well,
did have to do.
yeah. Well,
So
I think what came to mind, what was part of what came to mind. I still don't have no idea where I was going, but I have met A2 before, who in the they labeled it as Christianity. They say things like, "Oh well, isn't it just like Jesus to give up all of ourselves for other people?" And so they
What?
yeah, they make this like this religious thing and this great, like, I am the most like Jesus of any of you because I have the feeling of giving myself up for other people. And so that's where I think part of what I was trying to say is that's where like this Christian aspect can be really dangerous for like twos, because it's good. What they do is in the Bible
sure.
and preached as the best
No, and
thing.
there's often an association that twos have with some kind of religiosity, in
Yeah.
different forms, and conceptualizing themselves as saints or
Yeah.
angels or something like that.
Yeah. It's just amazing how far down the rabbit hole they can go with like rationalization.
Hmm. I'm curious. I'd mentioned this in the chat, but um, I want to know what, from your perspective, because I mean, you've known us for a couple years now. A couple of us that are sexual types or that have sexual in our stacking. What, from your perspective, stands out to you about us in that way that you can say to yourself, like, oh, maybe that's them having sexual?
Well, I think I've talked about it before, but like with sexual men, I'm instantly like, for the first few minutes of meeting them, I am instantly very attracted to them.
Hmm.
So that's one of the things.
Right. Nice work.
Yeah, anytime.
Good eye.
Um, but it fades with time, so don't worry.
Yeah.
Um,
Then you go into the SPSX realm, and
right.
then it
Yeah.
just stays forever.
Yeah.
You're hooked.
Now I don't know if there's any like one thing with that kind of
Or anything.
that umbrellas all of you, but like there is with like specifically with John, there's like this uh to put it in a picture, to give you draw you a picture. It's kind of like when he's talking to you, he I love you, John. He stabs you with a spear and is just like, I am now talking to you. And
I'll
is
tap
like,
that.
you can't go
Yeah.
away because there's a spear in you.
Hmm.
But also it's very interesting. So it's this like, it's the piercing, it's the like, we are in this, it's just us kind of
Hmm.
like thing. I don't
It's
know.
Hmm.
like
That's
holding
just
you hostage and
yeah. But
talking
like
at you.
also it's totally fine. Like I'm into it. But
I
it's
never
very
just go off on long tangents.
No,
without break.
no, definitely not.
45 minutes later.
You
But
never
it's
talk
also
about
it's
Egypt.
not no, but it's not like you are in this like kind of airy like space when you're talking about things. It's like you're like I don't know if you've ever heard a lecture that just sort of goes on and on and on and makes no sense. Like that's not what I'm talking about. Like when you talk about stuff, you're like, we are in Egypt right now looking at the Sphinx and this is amazing. And I don't know. That's a terrible description of it, but that's how John's obvious sexualness comes out.
Yeah, it's very. John is one of the most piercing individuals, if not the most piercing individual I've ever met. I
It was a
remember
little
when
terrifying at first.
I met him in New York, and that was the first time that I had knowingly met another sexual type, and so I was definitely like observing a lot. And um, John is every bit as penetrating as he seems in photos. Like his energy is it's like you said, like it stabs you like a knife.
Yeah.
I like to make sure that everybody gets a pin through them and put on in a glass case on my wall with the other insects.
But that
There
is
you
what
go.
it feels like.
We're all objectified.
It's very
Oh, yeah.
specific.
It is. But at the same time, nobody else pays attention to
That's right.
me that much. Like and when normal people, not normal, but you know what I mean. When
Right.
when normal people you're having a conversation with, they just sort of acknowledge your existence. Whereas with John, you're like in it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
He's like, I know you're here and I'm listening to every word that comes out of your mouth, which is
Mhm.
terrifying because I don't
Mhm.
know what comes out of my mouth half the time.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is both the 4 and the 5,
Yeah.
because I w- feel like we're gonna arrive at a new planet together if we like do this. It's like whatever I want to talk about. It's I feel like we're coming into a new universe or burrowing through the crust or something like that. And so on one hand, like there's the sense of being deep. It's not like a conscious thing, but it's the sexual for depth and sexual together, and then discovery and sexual together with the 5.
Mhm.
hmm Yeah, it does. It feels like we're in a spaceship about to land on a new planet. And you're like, are you ready for this? And I'm like, I don't even know how I got here.
Meeting John was great because like it's like I know what that is now. I know. I mean, it's an extreme version of it, but it's like I know when someone's doing that. It also kind of I'm not doing that to that degree, but I know I'm doing the same thing
hmm
sometimes. And shortly after that, I started looking for other sexual types, and that was when I ended up dating a sexual one, and she was kind of important because of her we discovered the collage exercise. But she just had like a very it's a similar thing where she had a way where she was stabbing you with her eyes that she just demanded attention. Like you couldn't ignore her, and if she was talking to you, it's almost like trying to make sure that you couldn't pay attention to anyone else. Like what I'm saying
Yeah.
is so captivating, and I want you to. I'm so here with you, and I need you to be really in this, to get in me, or and it was just such an tense example, and I know that I'd seen that before. John was the only other person who'd done the same thing, and I was like, oh yeah, because I'm not aware that I'm doing that either.
Well, yeah, it's just your regular everyday existence.
Right. So it was really good to meet some other sexual types to see. That's one aspect of it.
Part of it is like hooking, but it's like I don't like you might not like it right now, but if we're gonna keep burrowing into each other like this, you might like it. It's
Yeah.
like hold on to the roller coaster at least long enough, and you'll develop a taste for this. Just like let's keep going.
That makes sense. Yeah.
But you
and
do. You do develop a taste for it.
and it's like I like unconsciously, but it's like I want to like put a needle into your soul so that like I'm stuck there like like a splinter or something like that. And if you like it, you'll come back. But
Hmm.
I need to touch that and be touched by you. It's not just a one-way street. Like I need to like
Yes.
feel like there's a real friction going on.
Mhm.
And like it's not about stacking for me, but there's when I can reach that with somebody versus not that I like remember them. So like as a
Hmm.
social blind person, I have fucking terrible facial recognition and name recognition and or recall or remembering details that are like really obvious about stuff. Like even really good friends will tell me stuff that a million times that I really should know, and I'll completely forget about this part of their life because it hasn't reached that thing.
Yeah.
And I'll like somebody, but if I haven't reached that thing, I won't remember them. And so, but yeah, it's like trying to like if my body is made of wood, I want to like get something in there and snap it off and have them care like a seed of myself in them.
That's
Uh,
really good.
and something to I think what Emiko was speaking to that I think is compulsive in sexual types. So it doesn't just play out in attraction relationships, but just generally speaking, there's a need to take things to the next level, to push it to another level. Like things staying somewhat stable is very feels like there's no growth or life or something, and
Hmm.
Yeah.
so that can get really compulsive. But I notice that like in something like jobs and I mean I've been on like there'll be things that are like just going totally normal or fine, like a social situation or something like that, and it's not in every case, but or like a lecture or something, and at some point I have to like do something to get it to keep moving or something like that. And I can feel those places where things are coasting. And I think most sexual types that I know have that radar. And there's a need to kind of like push things along, but it becomes like chronic pushing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a self-pres sexual 9, I'm partly mentioning the self-pres part and the withdrawn 9 part. I have a pretty good sensor for when a sexual first person is wanting a certain something from me, and I stop it, right? Or I usually, you know what I mean? There's this thing they're wanting something, and it's really obvious they're wanting that escalation into a certain, well,
Escalation's a good word for that.
yeah, escalation into yeah,
The next level.
some next level, and I understand, and I have a choice. Let's say it that way to go there or not, right? And sometimes if I'm particularly not feeling it in the moment or not feeling it with that person, I'm just there's a way that I just close up seal it all up and turn away so that they're not able to access, and I stop that process. But it's very definitely, it's like, okay, they're wanting that thing, and do I want to do that right now, or do I want to do it ever? That, yeah.